All right, so there we go. That was The Swimmers. Hands up if you've seen The Swimmers yet. Who's seen The Swimmers? I haven't actually seen it yet. I read Butterfly in 3 sittings. It's an incredible story, and it's really, really well told. But I'm quite pleased that I've read it first and not seen the film yet. But I'm gonna look forward to seeing the film. Dina Nayeri and Dina Pasic of Secondary. Be lovely to see you again. Here we are, and I've just seen your email, Dina Nayeri, which says says that there's another Dina and another Greek NGO. I mean,
honestly. I was like, how can I find out on this like global event that I'm I don't have in my calendar?
I don't meet that many Dinas.
No.
I think when that email came in, I just quickly connected it with you because you and I have talked before.
Yes, we have.
One I had in mind. Now I have to reset for her.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, not a Dina, but Yusra, who we did connect with briefly on Instagram, but as you probably both have seen, her career, her profile skyrocketed with this amazing story of her becoming representing the refugee team at 2 Olympics, and then of course the book and the film and everything else. So she did say hi. She kind of waved to us, and we did a little effort to get her here, but she's speaking at the UN, I think, tomorrow in somewhere in Europe anyway. But the bonus for us is that we've managed to track you both down and get you here, so we're really grateful. And the leadership and experience you both have in this space is way beyond where Yusra is at. So we're very lucky, even though her story is obviously inspiring and engaging millions of people. So for the Rebel Book Clubbers who are here tonight, great to have you with us, and or to daytime if you're joining us from the US. And for those that are watching the catch up, the video at a later point, I'd love to. We've met before, both of you, but many who are watching and joining now won't have met you before. So starting maybe with Dina Nayeri, let us know. We know you are of course the author of 2 books, The Ungrateful Refugee, which we read with you in 2020. That was our 66th book.
Yeah.
And of course you've written Who Gets Believe, which we'll talk about, published this year. And am I right in saying that you've just about to launch your 2nd play as well?
I've just finished it. I finished it like yesterday, and I very impulsively threw it up on Instagram. But
this is exciting. So give us a brief intro to your work, because it's your sort of canon of work in this space is growing really fast. So like, what have you been working on over the last few years?
Well, I guess primarily I've been a writer of prose. I write fiction and nonfiction. I've written essays and memoir and novels and short stories, mostly around either the refugee experience or displacement, or around, being an Iranian in the world, like the experience of the Iranian diaspora. So, very much my fiction has been based on people like me, because I was born in Iran and I was a refugee when I was 8 years old, and arrived in the US when I was 10. So it just kind of spans things like assimilation and escape and waiting and all of those things. But now I'm moving into script writing because I crave I crave to just see something staged. And so I've been writing plays, but my themes remain the same, just love and human relationships during such crises,
which we're always drawn to, regardless of how what we understand about crises. So we're hopefully got the next Hamilton, the next societal shifting West End Broadway musical incoming. Well, is there a working title for the 2nd play?
The play, I've tentatively titled it Runaways, but that is long in the making. A sooner thing is that The Ungrateful Refugee, which we talked about, is being turned into an opera, and that will be staged in the summer of 2026.
Oh wow! Yeah. Well, tell us briefly about that journey from non-fiction, part memoir, part campaign, part sort of set of policies for how we can change things, to an opera. How did that happen?
Well, usually, operas usually get done because a composer becomes interested. So, the book was written entirely in prose. It was my story, escaping from Iran with my family, and then the stories of refugees that I met, at Katsikas, where Dina is, has also worked. So and then also, just kind of essayistic and reflections on what I what I have experienced of the refugee experience and what I think about it in the world now. The reason it became an opera is because this wonderful composer, Jeremy Thurlow from Cambridge University, read the book and was inspired to write music for it. So then me and a librettist worked on, shaping it into an opera. The opera will be the stories of just those other families, not me. Right. There's a character who is sort of me, but is kind of a storyless, outsider on the stage. It's about them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's exciting. And just maybe one more question on the kind of format side of things before we come to Dina from Secondary. Do you, in terms of impact, so the bigger mission here of trying to change things for the better in the world for refugees, are you finding, because you're trying lots of different writing tools here and creative tools, are you finding one is getting more traction than the other, or are you finding I'm just going to do whatever I'm drawn to and see what happens?
Well, I think I come at things more from the perspective of a writer. I mean, wanting to be a writer was actually very separate for me than my experience as a refugee. And so I actually started studying to be a writer and started my writing career before I was actually even able to share the story of having been a refugee. So for me, it's not instinctive to really think of it as, what will the impact of this be? It's more of a kind of solitary process of making sense of the world creatively. And then only afterward do I think, okay, well, what can this do? Yeah. So I think I see my job as creating stories that are moving, and are powerful and show the truth somehow, or show some truth. And then I hope that then there are helpers and collaborators and people like Dina, for example, who can make use of these stories by who they share it with.
Fantastic. Well, it's amazing that you've been very productive, and the opera sounds incredible. So Dina from Secondary, if that's okay.
We need nicknames.
Exactly. We'll keep saying Secondary, which is good because it'll drum it into us. Secondary. Tell us briefly. I appreciate we don't need to go all the way through your story because that's a lot. But how did Secondary come about, and what is its primary focus?
Sure. So just want to say congratulations, Dina. That's really exciting. I think it's been a couple of years since we spoke. So yeah, great to hear how much you've done. Yeah, I'll look forward to watching the opera at some point.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'm Dina Pasic, the other Dina, Secondary Dina, whatever you'd like to call me. So yeah, I'm a co-founder of Secondaries. We're a small grassroots NGO that formed in Greece as a response really to the refugee situation that was unfolding on the ground in 2015, 2016. I went there as an independent volunteer, like most people who responded to that situation. And I initially, my incentive was to understand the situation better. So to kind of see for myself what was happening, because I was also skeptical of the media. I was unsure they were painting a real picture of the situation. I thought, this is Europe, there's no way that refugees are being treated this way. Unfortunately, I turned out to be extremely naive, and it was worse than I thought. It was a camp called Katsikas near the border with Albania, where there was 4 volunteers trying to support 2,000 people who had just been dumped there, essentially, to sleep on a bed of rocks and floorless tents. It was very it was tough. I actually can't watch the swimmers, I don't think, yet, because I feel like it's so it just takes me back to that moment. That was a really depressing thing to see. So while there, my life basically changed. Something in me I just felt like I had to be there. And I was working in Qatar at the time for an education organization, and basically through the process, I didn't quit my job instantly, even though I called my boss from camp saying, I can't leave. The situation is too dire. He calmed me down. He said, come back. So over the process of a year, I kept going back and forth between Qatar and Katsikas. In that time, I'd met 3 other people, the other co-founders of Secondary, and together we decided to do something, essentially. And this didn't have to be an NGO. We didn't necessarily want it to be an NGO, but it had to be an NGO by law. So to work in camps in Greece, you had to be an official entity. And so we formed Secondary, partly because we needed to, but also because what we wanted to do was something that we felt was different to what other NGOs were doing. And this was mainly about the process, I would say. So although we deliver educational activities and we focus on integration of refugees, which means different things at different moments in a refugee's journey to asylum, we realized, or we identified, that the way we worked with people was very different to how big NGOs do it. And I think this is also because we came there as individuals. We didn't come there as like humanitarians. We entered this camp and made friends with the community, and just as you would anywhere, really, like we just worked with people, which is different in humanitarian response because there's often a different kind of power dynamic at play when an NGO enters a camp and the recipient of that aid interacts with that NGO. So we tried to sort of do humanitarian work differently. And over the last 5 years, we have basically established ourselves as an education NGO. And I would say that this is sort of how we describe ourselves generally. But then within that, we do lots of different activities that are basically determined by the communities we work with. So language classes, trips for kids outside of camp, activities to help them meet the local community, activities like trainings to help them engage in local communities. So if they want to become part of that community one day, like how do they access the different systems that are that other locals access? And so just to quickly wrap up, because I know I can go off on tangents about this, but up until 2019, 2020, we were doing education programming in camps, so delivering education. Once COVID hit, the governments used that as an excuse to shut down the camps and to basically prevent people from going in and out. That meant kids were outside of school for a year, basically. We transitioned our programming online, but in the process, we had a lot of time because we weren't in camp every day. And so we decided to sort of focus on how we can increase our impact. So it's not just refugees that need support, but also sometimes humanitarian workers or people working in like local civil society who've never interacted with refugees before. So we developed trainings for people who engage with refugees to sort of inform them of the different biases that are at play when you interact with vulnerable, so-called vulnerable people. And these aren't always negative biases. Biases can have a negative kind of connotation, but there are things that our brain just does. It forms pictures of this person before you even get to know them. And so we have trainings that sort of inform people of how our brain works when it comes to how we view certain groups, but then also advocacy training for refugees to help them engage in society in a way that's confident and self-resilient and independent of other NGOs and actors that are trying to help them.
No, it's fun. It's really great to hear about the background and obviously what you've created. And it's also just it's amazing. Like you've gone there and you've made this thing happen in one of the hardest, most, protracted problems in the world, right? And you're serving and supporting people on all sides there, which is fantastic. Can you give us a sense, Dina, of what does the daily work look like on the ground right now in Greece? Where are you having a real impact? Where do you feel your impact is happening?
That's a good question. Well, the day-to-day is very hard to describe just because things happen all the time. But I would say, like, generally, our team on the ground is mainly focused on sort of the programs and projects that we do with the communities, the refugee community we work with. So that means running a youth kind of scouts-based program for young people that basically sort of, it varies. Like some kids go to school, some don't. So it's hard to, again, like just paint one single picture of the refugee experience. But the idea of this program is essentially to help get kids to feel like kids again. So it's not just about the kind of chores, the chores that come with being a refugee kid in this context. And a lot of kids have to translate for their parents. They're often outside of like their childhood roles in this context very quickly. Yeah. They're often outside of like school, like they're not integrated fully into it. So they're always kind of on the periphery of any kind of identity, let's say. And so we have a program that sort of brings them all together and helps them develop their own sense of self in this completely crazy and ever-changing context. So there's a lot of delivering that. And other than that, it's yeah, delivering our self-advocacy classes, training for the adult or the youth, the sort of, let's say, 18 plus. I think that's, and now I think they're also preparing for a Christmas party soon, or like a holiday party, which is something that they love doing with the community.
So it's so many, it's such a variety of different things. And one of the things, of course, that you're really focused on, from what I'm learning, is helping people make sense of their changing identities, and, well, everyone understanding that. And of course, coming back to you, Dina Nayeri, this new book of yours, which I know some of our members have read this year and have got a lot out of, and I keep hearing about it, Who Gets Believed, is about this sort of, you know, fortune or misfortune of birth, race, class, etc., versus the data, the science, and everything else. Has created this chaos and unfairness in our world. Tell us a little bit more about Who Gets Believed, what stories you focused on, and what you were trying to do with that book.
Well, I mean, the book grew out of my first nonfiction book, which was Ungrateful Refugee, that we talked about. And as you recall, that book had it was kind of trying to map out the arc of the refugee experience. You know, what it's like from escape to waiting, to asylum storytelling, assimilation, and then kind of later, after you assimilate, this longing to go back. And I got particularly obsessed with that middle section, with the research around it, which is about asylum storytelling. I had so many stories that I gathered from, you know, lawyers and charities and refugees themselves. And I, you know, I was just, there was just too much there for one book, but it was also so much deeper than just an issue about refugees. I mean, it became very clear that you know, the vulnerable are listened to in a very different way from the privileged, and their stories are heard differently. And it was exactly the kind of thing that Dina was just talking about with our mental kind of heuristics that we have, these shortcuts that lead us to, you know, see one thing and then make a bunch of assumptions that we kind of correlate with that kind of person. And so I started to research. I guess I had all of these extra stories from the Ungrateful Refugee that had to do with storytelling and not being believed. And then I also remembered this being such an obsession of my own when I was a kid. I mean, when I was a child and newly arrived as a refugee in America, learning, you know, kind of English better and going to school and all of that stuff, I just remember feeling very much like, you know, we were the kind of people you believed before, and we're definitely not the kind of people you believe now. And so I became obsessed with, how do I become the kind of person who's believed later in life? And it was a big theme in my life. And so looking at these stories, I got particularly obsessed with this one, a story of a man called KV, who had been rejected for asylum on the basis of this completely made up thing, this thing the Home Office made up in the UK called self-infliction by proxy, which is that they said that he inflicted his own torture scars so that he would get asylum into the UK, which is something that just does not happen. And his case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And so I started researching that case. I talked to him and his lawyer, and then I started to talk to the Innocence Project about similar cases of people who've been wrongfully convicted. You know, a lot of people of color. I started to talk to doctors about, you know, how people make their pain believed. You know, what is the pain performance that makes you believe a particular patient, and what are the characteristics that they have? And this conversation has just led to this kind of deeper reflection on what the meaning of belief. You know, why do we believe some, and why is it that, you know, we believe some people so very easily too, people who haven't earned, you know, the kind of credibility that we give them, whereas others, you know, come in with a story that is very, very probable, you know, and it happens all over the world, and yet we still dismiss them and force them to kind of meet these incredible thresholds, you know, of doubt, I guess, reasonable doubt or whatever.
And it listening to, well, it makes me want to read the book, Dina, which I haven't yet. So it makes me want to really read the book. But listening to that, it almost feels like this psychology that's at the heart of whether we believe human stories or not, explains so much of this particular crisis, but obviously many other things that are wrong in our world. How do we? What did you reach a kind of insight through your reflections at the end of that? I know there's so many stories where you're like, okay, here's something we can now start to apply.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think my writing craft is, you know, I'm not a journalist. I'm a creative writer and a kind of more of a literary writer, which means that I'm a kind of writer who's more interested in opening up the questions and reflecting on them, and very, very kind of wary of offering up a lot of answers. And I think that's where writing becomes less interesting for me, when I start to kind of say, well, this is the answer to everything. And I think I got as close to that as I was comfortable with The Ungrateful Refugee.
Yes.
With Who Gets Believed, I had things that I wanted to say, but it was more kind of a process of meditating on these questions for me. I did think a lot about storytelling and what it means and how it shapes us. So, I thought about how, we developed these shortcuts through storytelling at a very, very young age, because, the stories that we hear repeated have certain kinds of heroes, certain kind of villains. They have certain kinds of trajectories, and how much that affects asylum storytelling. When people come in and they start to talk about their experiences, they tell their stories with a particular shape, the shape that we've learned to apply to our stories in the West is kind of, the arc, right?
Right, the hero's journey, yeah.
Exactly. And not all stories from all cultures have that shape. They have lots of different shapes. I mean, if you want to know what Iranian storytelling is shaped like, you should go and watch a movie by Kiarostami, or read some of the old tales. They're shaped very differently. But people come in and start telling an asylum officer a story in a different way than what they're used to. And that officer thinks, oh, well, they're being dishonest or cagey, or they're meandering, So a lot of what I thought about, I guess, in this book was about how much of what we believe is unconscious and cultural and based on who makes us feel comfortable from childhood, and as Dina was saying, it's all just quick, shortcuts we're not even aware of.
And you see this play out for real, right, in Greece, Dina, from Secondary, these stories?
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, we don't work with such difficult well, I mean, we have obviously people in our classes who are in difficult situations and who someone else is making a decision for them based on what they've told. But it's interesting what you said about the performance aspect, because what we've noticed is not obviously that there's the negative biases, which are like, viewing refugees as threats or as less than, is othering. It makes them feel like they're less, smaller than you, that they're not equal to you. But what we've also noticed is that there's a negative side to positive biases towards refugees, because it also it others them in the sense that it again makes them is not quite on the same level as you. Like, oh, there's the hero. Oh, there's the sorry, I've lost my train of thought. There's a hero who's like overcome this insane journey, or there's a person who's just doing this because they're a product of their culture. Like, there are all these things, or he or she is a victim. They've gone through so much. Like, let's not expect too much of them. They're like all these little things that we do because we make all these assumptions about what this person has gone through. And it's like, my parents were refugees. I was a baby. I mean, I was too small to remember, so I don't like, it doesn't really apply. But or I mean, I don't use it in any way to demonstrate a point because I don't remember. But like, refugees are just people who, some are good, some are bad, some are complicated, some are less complicated. Like, and for us, like, what we have really tried to demonstrate in our work is that, like, you just need to speak to that person to understand what they need or how they can be engaged, or, it's really like going down the road to like your neighbors or to your friends. Like, they're not this like special category that needs protection beyond what's reasonable. Like, of course they're fleeing a war, but then they just need access to opportunities, really. Like, they don't need you to rebuild their life for them. They just need, this person was an engineer back home, or like a kindergarten teacher or whatever. So we really tried to highlight the fact, or to decrease the othering, by trying to just tell the story that these are just really regular people who have gone through something extremely unlucky and unfair. And they don't need to like perform for you to be believed. Like, they don't need to be this victim who's like, cutting themselves in order to get your attention, or this hero who's, they should be treated with dignity and respect and their rights just for being there, and this is sort of like the kind of what the group we're trying to work with is to showcase to people that just in the way the humanitarians work with refugees can really make them feel others and can make them feel small and can make them lose their confidence, and then they just become a shell of a person instead of being somebody that we're trying to get into society again because they want to be part of it. So a lot of what she said what Dina was saying completely resonates with
from what you're seeing every day and working with people every day on. And I don't want to, I'm hesitant to bring the UK into this, or the shit show that is the UK at the moment. But right now, I kind of wish we were broadcasting tonight directly into the UK Parliament, right? Because right now, millions of refugees are being othered by the British government, and we're seeing it's a real mess. I guess my question to you both is around this. The fear that's being played on that so many people seem to have in places like the UK, it comes clearly from an uneducated place. They haven't read your books, Dina. They haven't learned about secondary yet. Why do you think that's so strong right now? Are we blaming a certain political class? Are we blaming the Murdoch media empire? Are we blaming the scale of the refugee crisis itself and the evidence of that? Why do we think we're at this point where countries like the UK, a lot of people, certain groups in the UK are really pushing in the complete opposite direction to compassion and humanitarian work?
You start, Dina.
That's a tough one. I haven't been following I actually have kind of stopped reading the news, which is terrible. But I honestly don't know. Like, I have to read several different outlets to just understand what is actually happening. So I follow like UK updates, just if maybe some organizations I follow, like Choose Love, they often talk about the different kind of legal things that are happening. So I know that I don't know the ins and outs of it, and I honestly don't know what would heighten it now.
Well, I actually don't think it's so different now than it has been. I think it kind of applies.
Because I remember it being very bad. I mean, that's actually what got me to act. It was a Daily Mail front page of like British holidaymakers upset on the Isle of Kos because there's like refugees washing up on the shores, and I was like, this is so disgusting that like I need to do something. Like, how can they see people that need help as something like a burden on their holiday? Like, I couldn't.
But I agree totally, and I think that the broad answer, my broad answer anyway, to Ben's question has to do with the thing that you're fighting to have, the kind of core of what you guys are doing, which is, you talked a lot about making them singular people, making them human, and making people understand that like that person's just that person, they haven't now been remade into refugee. Exactly. And I think that the problem with people's fear is that there is kind of a camp that's doing the very opposite work, which is to try to lump them into one huge category when there's so many, individual pains and also individual like catastrophes. And yes, they're separated by country or by war or by city or whatever has happened. But at the end of the day, these are just, many, many individual stories of people who need help. And in other contexts, we are fine with that. Like, we are fine with there being many, many sick in the world. We help them individually, but here's a situation in which somehow we've allowed this aggregated narrative to enter our minds. And if you studied writing, one thing you'll know is the best way to make a really bad story is to generalize it. A story gets better when you get more singular, more specific, more into the lives of one person, and then it becomes moving, and that person becomes human. And as they say, the cliche goes, they walk off the page. And I think that's the work that you're doing, right, Dina? Making them individual.
But yeah, I think very good point, because also about what you said about the group versus individual, because I think also the media, I mean, fear sells. Like, we know that's the easiest way to get us to act or to continue reading. Like, we biologically, like from the time of when we were hunter-gatherers, have had to like respond to fear very strictly so that we don't die. And this obviously sells, and the media knows it. So I think even when they tell stories, right, about refugees, it's not like they're going to say, oh, one refugee did this. They'll say, they'll talk in plural, and they make it sound like, okay, it's not just one person, it's like the whole group is somehow like likely maybe to do something equally as bad. And you're like, no, obviously I know, but many people will believe that, and it's an easy thing to think, like if you're scared. So
Exactly.
it's really,
and there's the individual stories, the thing that can, I mean, that's what's so powerful about stories like Yusra's, is it's like, oh, I've heard people say, and I completely understand, Dina, why you can't bring yourself to watch that film yet because of the pain that it would stimulate. But the you know, I've heard people even just talking about seeing the film saying, oh wow, like, because we hear the stop the boats and that horrible, all the statistics, and I mean, Stalin was not exactly a role model, but he said that thing I think that you're referring to as well, Dina, which is the you know, one soldier's death is a tragedy, but a million is a statistic, which you know, we're seeing with the war in the Middle East and Ukraine as well. So yes, stories matter, and telling these individual stories about human beings matter. So I want to invite others who are listening in. If you want to jump on and ask either of Dina's a question, we can keep you for a few more minutes, 5-10 more minutes. That'd be amazing.
Yeah,
and then we'll wish you happy holidays.
So by the way, as people are getting in, I should just tell you, like, I've also not watched the movie because of particular fears, but you know, the whole idea of, like, you know, coping with this through sport appeals to me so much, and I think I'm gonna go and watch it. You
should definitely read. I mean, she writes, whoever I think she's had someone wrote with her, but but she writes brilliantly, in amazing detail. So it is really gripping. But also she writes by the time she becomes this real in the spotlight for the media, all they want to know is about the boat crossing and her swimming, her sister swimming, and of course she keeps going there because she's like, I've got to tell this story because we've got to change things. But the pain that she's going through to tell it is always there. Do jump on if you've got a question. This is your moment to either of Dina's, or a reflection or a thought on this topic. But Dina, at Secondary, we spoke briefly last week, and about your work, and you were saying, you know, because there's a lot of people also, like in communities like ours, who are conscious about what's going on. They want to try and help, but they'll make their donations. But beyond that, it's like, what else can we do? We can share the stories, we can recommend books, we can recommend organizations. But you're actually looking for people, skilled people to get involved with Secondary. Could you share a couple of those asks?
Sure, yeah. So I probably didn't say this, but we're volunteer run. So we are dependent on volunteers, essentially, who come, hopefully fall in love with the organization and then grow in the ranks. So, you know, our team right now, we've had for a couple of years, but we are, again, reliant on volunteers. So if anybody's interested and would like to kind of, would like to experience, no, I don't like saying experience, but would like to learn more on the ground about what's going on, and fits, of course, the different kinds of roles that we require, I would encourage you to have a look at our website, secondary.org, and you'll see on the volunteer tab a bunch of different types of on the field, like on the ground roles. So everything from, you know, if you're a generalist who has some skills that could help an organization run, from admin to budgeting to, I don't know, if you have communication skills and know how to write or take a good photo, literally everything that we do requires volunteers in some way. And, you know, often it could even be a training that you do for us. Like, you'll have skills that are useful, and we would love to hear from you. So you could either do it directly through the website, or we can also post my email here. I don't know if you do that, Ben, but if you want to, you can post my email so people can get in touch with me, or if they get in touch through you to me, I don't mind. But we always need people. And it's not only on the ground, like you don't have to come to Greece to help. There's also remote opportunities. Like I think I was saying to Ben, like often we struggle with, for example, grant writing. Like we're dependent on donations or on donors, but grant writing is a very specific skill that most volunteers won't have. They're often like young professionals, and so if there's a person who might have that particular skill or ideas, that's also very welcome. And then of course donating. There are different opportunities to donate. At the moment, we do have our Christmas campaign running, so I encourage people, if they want to, you know, get a present.
Well, there's a Rebel Book Club vote that's gone out today, and for those that get book vouchers, they have the opportunity to donate to Secondary.
Amazing.
So, and we'll make a small donation as a club as well, but it's not going to make the real difference. It will be the people participating and spreading the word. So we'll absolutely share your email. Anka's already
Yeah.
Amazing. Anga's already shared the link there. Now, Anne's got a question for you, Dina Nayeri. Can you see it there? You talk so eloquently about how autistic people struggle with law enforcement. Are there ways that both the neurodivergent and neurotypical community can start to understand the role of neurodiversity for underserved communities?
Yeah. Well, I think from what I learned, and I'm no expert in this, but I was, kind of looking and looking to understand and talk to a lot of people. And what I learned is that it is in vulnerable communities and underserved communities, it is very, very kind of underdiagnosed. So there's a lot of people who are struggling with a lot of different things, and they're not recognized for that and getting the help they need and getting the support, or even just like the acknowledgement. You see nowadays so many people in adulthood discovering that they have, ADHD, or they're on the autistic spectrum, or, a lot of other just differences, which were never even acknowledged before. I'm in the process myself of getting some things checked out, because I have had OCD all my life, especially after I became a refugee. And, there was a lot of moments in my life where things were chalked up to, oh, Dina's, weird, or Dina's, always just saying things in this Dina way. And there's not a Dina way. There are things that people experience, because there's a reason for it, and it's really important to have that acknowledged and seen, and to get help for things that you need. So I think in vulnerable communities, they often go without that. And so I've met a lot of refugees who struggle with various things. And so when there's not accommodations made for those things, often either they're misunderstood, or they're disbelieved, or they're dismissed, or, they're accused of a number of things, like, I don't know, being underprepared, or lying, or whatever else. I think the story that you're talking about is the way that the autistic suspects are interrogated, which is terrifying for them in ways that are so terrifying. And when police interrogate, in America at least, they can lie. So they're lying to these people who are very literal and believe that the police has to tell the truth, and so they stand no chance in that interrogation. And so often they give false confessions. So I found that to be incredibly tragic. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's there's so many different vulnerabilities, aren't there? And just in terms of like looking forward now, obviously this is, I think, as you said on your Instagram earlier, Dina, this has been an awful year. I mean, it has been an awful few years, which is why so many of you are leading in the space, and so many of us are trying to learn and support more. What's your hope in your organizations or your work as we go into a new year? What are you going to try and focus on? Where are you going to try and make an impact? Dina from Secondary, what's your focus for 2024?
Big question.
Is that too far away yet? It's a whole 3 weeks.
For grassroots, yeah. No, I think, it has been a really depressing year, and maybe even just several years. I've lost track of when things were good. But I think I was recently at a conference, and I just, I was in a place where I met so many kind of like-minded people that it brought back this hope inside me, lit this hope where I was like, yes, everything seems, because in these moments you can also kind of lose motivation, and like, what are we doing? How is this going to help? Like, these people have so many walls that they have to crash through, that like, what is this little education I'll have moments of doubt, because it just seems so small in the face of like everything that's going on. But yeah, again, being around people who are just as passionate and excited about like trying to make a difference reminded me that, yeah, it doesn't really matter like how many walls they'll have to go through. Like, as long as we can make this part of their journey a bit better, as long as we can maybe prepare them better for the next part, or whatever the case may be, that's already a win. And so for us, I think we're gonna, as well as running our programs that were on the ground, we're really focusing on identifying like more organizations to work with for our trainings, both for the staff of those organizations and for the refugee communities that they work in, because with the groups we piloted with, the participants were really happy with what they got. And so that kind of like energized us, and we're like, okay, maybe we have something that again is targeting individuals. It's not going to be a whole organization that's going to change because of our training, but if one person understands like how their brain works in a particular moment a little better, that just opens the door to so much more reflection and so much more growth, like, and self-awareness, that ultimately I think is what we're lacking and why things are the way they are, really.
100%. It's amazing. Dina Nayeri, looking ahead, you've got so many projects. What's your focus going to be?
Well, I mean, I think there was a chunk of my creative life that I devoted to kind of talking to the native born and telling them, you know, what I would like them to know about the refugee experience. And I think I'd really like to turn in another direction. And first of all, I feel that what I can contribute is my imagination and storytelling. And I want to tell the kinds of stories that refugees will want to read, that will help them heal, that will help, you know, and I think that means going deep into the imagination and maybe away a little bit from these traumas, and to kind of write something that, you know, allows people to escape into just being human, love. You know, I wrote on Instagram today, I wrote a love story. I want to write more love stories. I want to write more funny stories. I want to write stories about, you know, I don't know, an embarrassing situation. Like just that show that people continue to be human and they continue to be singular. And I'm curious about those kind of stories, and I want to dive into them. And I think it's you know, good to have those from a person who's been a refugee, because I don't think we should just tell refugee stories. We should tell stories from the lens of having been displaced, you know, and that's a different thing.
Yes, it's a totally different thing. And it's yeah. And it reminds me of a book we read really early on called, it's still non-fiction, called City of Lies, Love, Sex and Death in Tehran. Yeah. And the author's name has just escaped me. Someone will remind us. And it was fantastic because it was the stories from this kind of world of a city that most of us hadn't connected to. And it was so rich and full of color, and it could have been an opera, a stage musical, a film, and everything else, but it just gave us insight into the economics, the politics, the you know, the culture of the city. There we go. Ramita Navai, well done, Alex. And she was our first ever author guest. So Dina, fantastic. The storytelling is so important, and thank you for doing so much of it. And I hope that you can connect with Yusra, and she can play a part in what you're doing as well, because she's got a platform now, for both, an amazing platform. So if we do connect with her, we'll send her in your direction. And Dina, secondary, thank you for your work and sharing it, and your volunteer roles. We will do our best to see if we can find people to support them.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for inviting me again. I really appreciate it.
And hopefully, although you're not meeting tomorrow, you'll keep connected with each other.
sorry about giving you a
we can get an actual
No, I'm going to wish you both happy holidays from everyone at Rebel Book Club, and thank you for your amazing work. Make sure you rest.
Happy holidays to you all as well.
Your energy. Take care, both of you.
Thank you, Dina. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye. All right. Thanks from everyone here. So don't go away, everyone else. I wanted to share, before we go into breakout groups, here are 4 books that kind of relate, because we need more books that relate to this. So Hope Not Fear, Hassan Akkad, which I'm reading in parallel with, because I managed to finish this one so quickly because it was so amazing story, is Finding My Way from Refugee to Filmmaker to NHS Hospital Cleaner in the UK. So lots of overlap. He was also a producer on The Swimmers, the story. So yes, lots of connections there, but I started reading that, and that's very good. The Book Collectors we read this time last year in a Rebel Book Club, and it's about this underground library that was operated by a community during the Syrian war, from exactly really close to where Yusra Mardini's family is from. So that's a really powerful story as well. No Ballet Shoes in Syria is a kid's book that I'm currently reading with my daughter. And it's about a family seeking asylum in Manchester, and the room where she's going every day to seek asylum is just below where there's a ballet class going on, and she's drawn to the music, and she's the one having to take all this responsibility as an 11-year-old because her mother doesn't speak English, and try and get the family through the asylum process, which is horrific, but ballet kind of saves her and connects her. And so it's a really amazing story. I'm loving that with my daughter. And then the other book, which is kind of connected to all this but really big pictures, Nomad Century by Gaia Vince, which is about how climate change is going to be driving a much bigger refugee crisis or migration crisis, amount of migration in the world over the coming 20 years. So yes, that was definitely my book of the year in 22. 3 billion people on the move, and how it can actually solve a lot of the problems we've got in the world rather than create more. So yes, Wow, we're really lucky to hear from both the Dinas. And we're going to have a little breakout session now so you can reflect on what you've just heard, thoughts on this, and anything else you want to chat about. So dive in and we'll do that. Enjoy.